This weekly series of short performances is brought to you by the Gilboa Historical Society and made possible by a grant from the New York State Council on the Arts. This week we present a story by Marie Payne, Veterans Memorial. Nancy's family has had 3 generations of soldiers. The experiences of these men were often humorous, tender, and traumatic. But her memorial to these veterans is a tribute to all of our fighting men and women.
I'm storyteller Nancy Marie Payne. I'm a member of the Story Circle of the Capital District, and our home base is Proctor's in Schenectady. I'm pleased to be here in Gilboa, and I hope that you can relate to some of the stories I will share with you. I'm going to look at some of the holidays, the lesser celebrated holidays, but still very vital holidays in this time of the year. Let's start with Veterans Day. Veterans Day honors all of the men and women who have served this country in any of the armed forces throughout the years. I am pleased to be part of 3 generations of men and women who have served. I'm going to start with my grandfather on my mother's side. Charles St. John was born in Oswego, New York, and in his mind, he had the disadvantage of being born into a family with 4 girls, plus his mother, a house of 5 girls, 5 women, and Charles. He grew up to be a very quiet boy. A man of few words was Charles St. John. He loved nothing better than to be out in the woods hunting. He was an excellent hunter. Or down by the lake fishing, and he had many a fishtail from there. He also enjoyed being in the pubs with his friends. When the war started the war started much earlier, but the United States got into the war in Europe in 1917. My grandfather joined immediately. He was 29 years old, much older than most of the other recruits. My grandfather entered in July, and in September he found himself in France, a member of Pershing's army. Pershing was not pleased with the troops when they got to France, and he thought they needed a lot more training. My grandfather and the other troops did not see battle until September. This did not endear them with the French and the British soldiers. Britain and France wanted America in the war. They wanted America's money, they wanted America's aircraft, they wanted Americans' munitions. They did not necessarily want American soldiers. They considered the Americans soft. And so the fact that they were here in July and did not get into battle in September, that did not make them look any better. The first battle that the Americans were in was this Battle of San Michael. My grandfather was not a man of many words, as I have said. And so from this section of the story on, I will be referring to research I did from other soldiers, other men who did write down their feelings and their experiences, and remembering all the while that my grandfather was right in the middle of this with them. The soldiers wrote about their living conditions. Trenches. They lived in trenches. They ate in trenches. They fought from the trenches. And when it rained, the trenches flooded, sometimes as high as their knees. The conditions were atrocious. When they were ordered forward, they crawled out of the trenches, and they had 2 weapons. One was a rifle with a bayonet. The other was a pair of wire cutters. The barbed wire was miles and miles, rows and rows. And when you did get into battle, it was usually hand to hand. It was terrifying. One of the men wrote about hearing the sound a bullet makes when it hits human flesh. My grandfather was a hunter. He'd been a hunter all his life. but the prey didn't shoot back. And you were usually so far away you did not hear the impact that the bullet made. And now you did. And when you heard that impact, you had this war of emotions. My buddy's been hit and I've been told to go forward. My buddy's been hit and it isn't me. The emotional roller coaster that these men were on, as well as the physical and the stress, was just awful. So they have this battle in Saint Michael. Up to this point in the war, and the French and the British have been in this war a long time already, there have been no major victories for them. This was the first. And it was with the help of the Yanks that they were able to pull it off. The Yanks rose a bit in the estimation of their colleagues. There was no stopping. They kept going. They were going now to the Argonne Woods. The Argonne Woods is a very densely wooded area between France and Germany. And this Argonne Woods was said to be impenetrable. One of the reasons for that was the Germans used this as a recreation and rest area for their officers and soldiers. And there was a warren underground, a labyrinth of rooms and connecting corridors. When the Allies finally got into this, they found the rooms had electricity. Some of the rooms had running water. There were pool tables and ping pong tables. There were pictures on the walls. Stolen pictures, but pictures. And so that's why the Germans had such protection around them. They had the trees, of course, and the density of the woods, but they also built concrete walls to stop any tanks that might have tried to come in. Those 3 tiers of barbed wire, and in the high places, the machine gun nests. There were deep and strong and numerous casualties, but it was taken. They entered the Argonne Woods in September, and by October 5th, the Allies had cleared it out. On October 1st, my grandfather was declared dead by the United States Army. He didn't know anything about it. His officers didn't know anything about it. His battalion didn't know anything about it. It seems my grandfather had lost his dog tags in a place where many Americans had been killed who also had no dog tags. And so the long, lengthy process of recording this dead soldier started. I have actually seen in a picture his grave in France. But he was very much alive. If he had known he was dead, he probably just would have gone home. But no. After the Argonne Woods, his battalion walked to Belgium. And again, if he had known what was going to happen in Belgium, he probably would have sat down and just waited. Because when he got to Belgium, that's when he was shot. It penetrated his arm, destroyed the muscles and the nerves in the hand, which cut off his means of employment back in America. He was an electrician. And it lodged in his hip. None of this time has my grandfather sent one letter home. Nothing. From the moment he closed the door in Oswego to this point, he has not written home. Volunteers came to him in the hospital of France and offered to write letters. I'll be home soon. Don't bother. From France, he was sent to England, to a hospital there. And it was there, while he was in that hospital, that the armistice was signed. November 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning. 11/11/11. Remember, they came to France in July. They started fighting in September, and the war is over in November. We weren't there very long. From England, my grandfather was sent to Long Island, to a hospital. He's got a telephone there. Does he contact home? No. Again, the aides offer to write letters. I'm going home, don't bother. On January 1st, 1918, his mother and sisters were notified of his death. On January 5th, he knocked on the door. It was, it's not something I would like to have lived through. His one sister had been in the kitchen baking. She was covered with flour on her apron, and she fainted in the doorway. The other one walked in and screamed, "You're dead," and then sat down on the couch in a stupor. My grandmother walked in, or his mother, my great-grandmother, and looked at him, and then came to her senses and hugged him. And then it started. Why didn't you write to us? Why didn't you tell us what had happened? We had memorial services for you. And it kept up. And it kept up. And finally, he was able to get out of the house and go down to the corner pub. Now, the war's over, but he's the first man home from Oswego. And so the young men in the pub, come on, Charles, tell us. What was it like? What happened over there? He didn't have the words. And he just motioned to the bartender who brought him a beer, and somebody else paid for it, and it could have gone on all night like that. He had nothing to say. Until finally they got to him. He said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. All right. Here's what I got to tell you about the war. If you're ever in the war, anywhere, let your mother know where you are. My grandfather's experience. My father was in World War II, and he was a little bit older when he entered the Army, but not that much older, not as old as my grandfather had been. This was not his father, this was his wife's father. So he joins, and he joins so that he gets a choice, and he chose to be part of the Army Air Force. It was part of the Army then. And he was trained to be a navigator. Before he left Oswego, he had an understanding with my mother that they would be married. But nothing was done about it because he was sent off. And he's in Tennessee at the time of this story. And they have leave. They can go out into the towns, and then all leave is cut off. No one's got leave. Be ready. You're shipping overseas at a moment's notice. My father goes to the commanding officer, his commander, and he says, I gotta go home. I gotta have my leave. And the commander says, you and how many other guys got to go home? No, says my father. I'm getting married. It's my wedding. The commander says, really? Jack, really? You're really? My father says, yes. All right, I'll give you a pass. Nothing's going to happen over the weekend. You'll be back Monday morning. 3 days. Okay, thanks. He gets home, he hitchhikes home, takes the bus when he can. He gets to Oswego. Nobody knows he's coming. There's no wedding planned. It's in his head. He goes to his home, his mother's house. They're surprised to see him, but they're happy to see him. And he says, I got to get down to see Mary. We got to get married. My grandmother says, Mary didn't tell us anything about that. Well, she doesn't know. Well, my uncle, who was quite a bit older than my father was one of those surprise kids. My uncle said, well, Mary's not even in town. She's out at a naval base on Lake Ontario answering telephones. So my uncle gets in his car and drives out to the naval base to get Mary. Jack goes down to his to-be mother-in-law's house to get things going. We're going to have a wedding. But it's taken so much time for him to get there and for his brother to get back with Mary and to talk to Mary about this that there's no time. He's got to be back in Tennessee. And so Mary goes with him. She packs her bags and they take off, and they're going to find a church on the way to Tennessee. And they do. in Tennessee, they find a pastor who will marry them. There's another American soldier there in the same situation with his bride, and they're married. He has one night with his wife, and then he's gone. And Mary goes back to Oswego and back to working for the Navy. In England, where my father was stationed, in northern England, he was at an Air Force base, and he was out on 35 missions. In the early part of the war, they were contracted for 25. So he had pretty good luck for 10 more missions. He said there was only one time when he was really scared, and that was over Germany, one of the many bombing runs over Germany, and the plane was hit. Now he's a navigator, and the navigator's job was not that important when they were flying in formation. I mean, they're all going the same place. You just stay and watch the other planes and stay together. And so his job was he had a gun. He told me he had a gun. And he actually showed me that on a B-29 when they came into Scotia Airport once. But he said he only fired the gun a few times and he never hit anything. But being the navigator, he would be the first one to vacate the plane when the pilot said, go. And so he said he was sitting with his legs dangling, holding on, waiting for the word to go, and his thought was, a terrifying thought to him, I hate sauerkraut. He didn't have to jump. The pilot got control of the plane, but the plane was flying very, very slowly, so the rest of the planes went. You can't all fly at that speed and hope to get all back. And so they were way behind, and then his services were needed to get them back to the base, and all was well. And probably 2 days later, he was out again in a different plane with a different crew. But my father made it, and I bless all the men that did make it, and doubly I bless all those that didn't. My husband also was in the Air Force. He was in the Strategic Air Command. And they were a team of elite men who were ready at any moment to get on a plane and defend America. And so when he was on base, no matter what he was doing, he was on duty. And he was used to being called at a second's notice, get on a plane and go here or go there. My husband was also known as a prankster, and he had a reputation for that. And he was getting fed up with going places and then never seeing them. He'd go to all these famous places in the world, and being a junior officer, he's the one that stayed with the plane. So on this mission, they were flying to England, and he was determined he was going to get to see something of England. So he was a radio maintainer, and at this moment he wasn't needed. So he was in the back with the soldiers, and he got all of them to sit on one side of the plane, which threw the plane off balance, which means the pilot had to take the plane off autopilot and actually drive the plane, fly the plane. And as soon as the plane got equilibrium again, my husband moved everybody to the other side. And he did this for the whole flight across the ocean, not being caught by any of the officers. When they got to England, the pilot said, Del, why don't you go out with the other guys? I'll stay with the plane. I need to rest. So he was a prankster. A lot of his pranks turned back on him. But I'm more interested in sharing with you his almost battle. One night, they were scrambled, as they were used to being. But this night, there was a tension. There was a tension among the officers. There was not this kidding. Everybody was strictly to the book. There was to be no talking. There was strict radio silence, and he was at his radio waiting for orders. He was the ears that would start whatever was going on, and he had no idea. He had no window, but he could feel the plane just circling. Huge, huge circles, but he knew that they weren't focused on anything. They were just up there waiting for an order. And the order never came. They were sent back to base. They all went in exhausted. And the next morning is when he found out that he had been part of the force that was ready during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so he didn't actually see battle, but he got to feel what it was like when everybody was focused. Thank you.